The Senate Judiciary Committee room had hosted 100 arguments, but this one felt different from the start. Jasmine Crockett walked in wearing navy blue, calm as ever, but her eyes scanned the nameplates like she already knew where the heat would come from. Her team had warned her. Senator John Kennedy was itching for a moment. He'd been making rounds on conservative talk shows, poking fun at what he called Twitter lawyers and woke legal minds. Everyone knew who he meant. Kennedy was already seated, papers shuffled, glasses low on his nose like some southern uncle with a folksy dagger behind every word. When Jasmine took her seat, he didn't even look up. But the camera crews did. Xpan, Reuters, even a few YouTubers with massive followings were there for this education policy showdown. What none of them expected was that Kennedy wouldn't attack her ideas. He'd go for something uglier. The hearing started slow. Formalities. Introductions. Then came the inevitable pivot to judicial overreach, Kennedy's favorite bait. When the chair yielded him time, he leaned back in his chair and smiled like he was talking to a waitress who got his order wrong. "Ms. Crockett," he said, stretching her name like taffy, "you have a law degree, correct?" She nodded once. "Yes, Senator." "Well," he said, flipping through his notes, "I sure hope it's from a real school, not one of those online academies with good hashtags." A few staffers chuckled nervously. One audibly gasped. Jasmine didn't blink. Kennedy wasn't done. "Because some of the things you've said, well, they don't sound like they came from someone who understands constitutional law. Maybe social media law, but not federal law." He looked smug. Jasmine folded her hands. No smile. No frown. Just stillness. People expected fire. What she gave them was far more dangerous. She spoke. "Senator Kennedy, I earned my JD from the Thurgood Marshall School of Law. You may not be familiar with it, but it's produced judges, scholars, and even the people who argue in front of the court you claim to respect." Then she leaned slightly forward. "And I don't carry my credentials like a shield. I carry them like receipts." The room went still. Kennedy's smirk faded, just slightly. And Jasmine Crockett had only just begun. Senator Kennedy blinked slowly, as if her response had caught him off guard, but not enough to admit it. He leaned back again, lips pursed, like a man searching for the next wisecrack instead of the next point. But Jasmine didn't need to fill the silence. She let it stretch just long enough to sting. "I suppose," Kennedy said finally, tapping the table, "you think a fancy degree gives you all the answers?" She raised an eyebrow, not in arrogance, but in warning. "No, Senator. I think it gives me the tools to recognize when someone's trying to substitute charm for substance." That landed. Softly, but directly. The chair cleared his throat, perhaps sensing the tension rising, but Kennedy waved it off. He wasn't ready to yield. "Let's talk about the Constitution, then," he said. "You claim to defend it, yet you've advocated for judicial reforms that some legal scholars, real ones, say undermine its very foundation." Jasmine didn't flinch. "Senator, the Constitution is not undermined by accountability. It's undermined by those who treat power like inheritance instead of service." Cameras clicked. Phones tapped. One journalist mouthed, "Wow." Kennedy leaned forward now, his folksy tone sharpening. "You think you're the first one to come in here with a speech and a chip on your shoulder? This isn't a hashtag hearing, Ms. Crockett. This is where real law is made." And there it was, the slip. The line that said it all. He wasn't questioning her policies. He was questioning her right to even be in the room. Jasmine let the moment hang. She breathed in once, slowly, and spoke with a voice steady as stone. "I'm not here for hashtags, Senator. I'm here because people like my mother, who cleaned floors while you clerked in chambers, never had someone sitting at this table who spoke their language. I'm here because law should serve those who live with its consequences, not just those who write it in marble halls. No shouting. No rage. Just truth, layered with purpose." Across the room, a young staffer scribbled furiously. Someone else whispered, "This is going viral." And still, Jasmine kept her eyes locked on Kennedy. "Would you like to test me on constitutional law, Senator?" she asked, her voice smooth as steel. Kennedy adjusted his glasses. For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. Jasmine leaned back, calm, because she knew the lesson was just beginning. Kennedy's fingers drummed lightly on the polished wood. He wasn't used to being the one under scrutiny, especially not by someone half his age and twice as prepared. For a moment, he wore the look of a professor who just realized the student in the front row had read the syllabus, and then some. "All right," he said slowly, trying to reclaim the floor. "Let's talk about Article 3 courts, Ms. Crockett. You've expressed concerns about judicial lifetime appointments. Do you believe the founders were wrong?" Jasmine's eyes didn't move. "No, Senator. I believe they expected future generations to build systems with integrity, not to let power stagnate under the protection of tradition." Kennedy tried to smirk, but it didn't land. "Checks and balances, Senator," she continued, her voice steady. "Not checks without oversight. Not balance without boundaries." Behind her, one of the interns tapped their phone, live streaming the moment. Kennedy leaned forward again. "And what gives you the authority to lecture this committee on how the Constitution should be read?" That was the real question. Not about law. About legitimacy. Jasmine leaned forward, too. "The same thing that gave you the authority to speak on behalf of Louisiana, an election. The difference is, I don't confuse a microphone with a crown." A few gasps. Kennedy's jaw tightened. Jasmine continued, slower now, each word like a page turning in a legal textbook. "I've spent years defending people the system forgot. I know what the law looks like when it fails. And I know what it sounds like when someone uses it as a weapon instead of a shield." "You talk about tradition," she added. "But tradition without truth is just ceremony." The room stilled. Kennedy looked down, maybe searching for a line, maybe hiding the crack in his posture. "And I came here," Jasmine said finally, "not to perform. Not to grandstand. But to remind this room that education isn't measured by pedigree, it's measured by preparation." She tapped the binder in front of her, every page tabbed, highlighted, ready. Across the chamber, the chairman blinked slowly, unsure whether to intervene or let the lesson continue. Kennedy said nothing. Because in that moment, even he knew. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just present. She was undeniable. The silence in the room wasn't ordinary. It wasn't the polite stillness that follows a closing statement. It was the kind of silence that follows realization, the sound of a room recalibrating who it thought was in control. Kennedy cleared his throat. "Ms. Crockett, I appreciate your passion," he said, the word passion dripping with condescension, "but passion without precision is dangerous, especially in law." Jasmine didn't react. Not visibly. But something in her eyes shifted, just enough for the staffers watching to sit up straighter. She reached calmly into her folder and pulled out a single page. "Senator Kennedy, this is your voting record from March of last year. You voted against the Legal Aid Expansion Act, which would have provided free representation for low-income defendants in civil cases." He blinked, caught. She continued, voice even. "Then in July, you co-sponsored a bill condemning so-called activist judges for rulings you disagreed with. And in September, you claimed that the judiciary was under attack from radicals who didn't understand American law." She placed the page gently in front of her. "You mock my education, but your actions betray either a willful misunderstanding of constitutional protections, or a deliberate strategy to erode them." Kennedy shifted. "Are you accusing me of—" "I'm not accusing you of anything, Senator," she cut in, tone razor sharp. "I'm documenting what's already on the record." Boom. That one hit. Across the room, phones lit up as reporters sent real-time quotes to editors. Jasmine's name was trending already, but now the clip had context, facts, receipts, and fire. Kennedy looked toward the chairman, hoping for a procedural out. None came. So he tried something else, deflection. "Well," he said, "I suppose in today's world, it's fashionable to confuse confrontation with credibility." Jasmine leaned forward again, her voice soft but loaded. "No, Senator. In today's world, it's necessary. Because for too long, rooms like this stayed quiet while people like you used decorum to dodge responsibility." She held her gaze. "And I didn't come here to fit your comfort zone. I came here to make you confront mine." The line hung there, like a legal brief nailed to a courthouse door. Kennedy had no rebuttal. He just looked down again. And Jasmine Crockett didn't have to say another word. The hearing room had turned into something else entirely. Not a policy discussion, not even a political duel, it had become a courtroom, and Jasmine Crockett was clearly the one holding the gavel. Kennedy's posture shifted. He sat up straighter now, the casual slouch gone, replaced by a stiffness he usually reserved for donors and press conferences. Still, he tried to salvage control. "I don't think this committee should be reduced to a personal score-settling ground," he said, looking not at her, but out toward the cameras. Jasmine stayed locked on him. "Neither do I," she replied, "but when you question my qualifications before I even speak, when you reduce my law degree to a punchline, that's not oversight, Senator. That's projection." The chair stirred in his seat but didn't interrupt. He knew better now. The hearing belonged to her. Kennedy's voice rose, just a notch. "Well, if you're going to accuse me of being dismissive, maybe you should consider that respect is earned." Jasmine tilted her head. "Respect?" she asked. "I've practiced law in courtrooms where the only thing separating my client from a 30-year sentence was my understanding of the Constitution. I've argued cases where judges tried to talk over me, just like you did. And I still won. Not because I had the perfect pedigree, but because I knew the law, inside and out." A soft gasp from the back row. She continued. "You don't get to define what legal expertise looks like, Senator. You don't get to rewrite the rules so that only people who look, sound, or vote like you get to be taken seriously." Kennedy's jaw tensed. "I'm not here to earn your respect," she said. "I'm here to represent the people who already gave it to me." That landed like a gavel drop. Then she reached into her binder again and pulled out a copy of the Federalist Papers. Real, worn, annotated. She opened it to a marked section and read aloud. "A judiciary independent from the whims of power must be protected not just in structure, but in public trust." She closed it. "You can smirk at my education, Senator Kennedy. But the people who built this country knew something you seem to have forgotten. Law isn't about looking powerful. It's about being accountable." Kennedy looked toward the chairman again, but Jasmine had already moved on. And by the time he tried to catch up, the courtroom she'd built had already issued its ruling. Kennedy's jaw shifted slightly as he adjusted his chair, but his voice didn't return right away. For a man who prided himself on having a quip for everything, silence wasn't his native tongue. And yet, here it was, stretching between them like a verdict. Jasmine leaned back, unbothered. She wasn't waiting for his approval. She was watching the room settle around the weight of what had just happened. The aides were quieter. The cameras steadier. Everyone, even those who didn't usually care, was now leaning in. The chairman finally broke the tension. "Representative Crockett, if you'd like to continue your statement." "I'm not finished," she replied. Not rude. Not rushed. Just certain. Kennedy gave a quick breath through his nose. "Then by all means." She stood, not because she needed to, but because she knew how power looked. And sometimes, standing changes everything. She turned to the full committee. "There's a pattern in these rooms. A pattern where women, especially women of color, are told to be grateful they're even allowed to sit at the table, then mocked the moment they try to speak." A few glances darted her way. Some uncomfortable. some proud. I've been told my credentials aren't enough. That my tone is too sharp. That I should smile more. That I should wait my turn. But here's the thing, Senator Kennedy, this is my turn. And I didn't come here to decorate your agenda with politeness. I came here to defend what matters. Her voice dropped slightly, firm, but almost intimate now. You called in to question my education. So let me teach you something, the law does not bend for the comfort of the privileged. It's meant to serve the most vulnerable. And when it fails to do that, the failure isn't in the text, it's in the people interpreting it. She paused. Then added softly, like today. Kennedy shifted. Not defensive, exposed. She sat down again, smooth, composed. I've worked in courtrooms where justice was a whisper. I will not let this room turn it into a joke. The room held its breath. Even Kennedy didn't speak. Because somewhere deep inside that decorated chamber, every word she'd just spoken echoed off the marble. And none of it could be unsaid. For the first time that morning, Senator Kennedy looked still. Not in control. Not amused. Just still. He tapped his pen lightly, as if trying to restart a rhythm he'd lost. But there was no melody left. Jasmine Crockett had changed the tempo, and the room was playing her beat now. He cleared his throat. Congresswoman, he said, voice flatter now, surely you understand that political disagreement doesn't amount to personal attack. I never intended to question your legitimacy. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She looked at him, and for a moment, her silence said more than any speech. Then she spoke, measured, not sharp, but undeniable. Intent is irrelevant when the impact is repeated, Senator. You didn't question my legitimacy. You mocked my intelligence. You turned my education into a punchline for cheap applause. She paused, letting that land. And while you're walking that back now, millions of people saw it in real time. Young people who watched you scoff at a black woman's legal knowledge, on national television, and wondered if their own education would ever be taken seriously. Kennedy's lips parted, but she kept going. You see, I don't just carry this degree for myself. I carry it for the girls from my district who are told their public school isn't enough. For the single moms studying after midnight. For the law students with loans and dreams and no family name to lean on. She turned slightly toward the rest of the committee. I worked for every page in my diploma. While you were clerking in quiet courtrooms, I was working double shifts and briefing cases at night. And I didn't do it for a title, I did it so I could fight for people the law forgot. Now her voice dropped. So no, Senator Kennedy. I won't let your words pass as casual politics. Not when they reinforce the idea that certain degrees, certain voices, only count when they come with pedigree or privilege. She sat back, hands folded. You asked for a lesson, Senator, she added. Well. Class is still in session. Kennedy blinked slowly. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something clever. But the words didn't come. Because even he could feel it now. This wasn't politics anymore. This was a reckoning. By now, Kennedy knew he'd lost control of the room. The rhythm, the authority, the smirking charm, gone. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just responded to his jab, she'd disarmed it, melted it down, and rebuilt it as a weapon of truth. Still, he wasn't one to retreat without a final swing. I respect your experience, Representative, he said, folding his hands with artificial calm, but I do wonder, in all this talk about credentials, do you believe the law is only accessible to those with a certain kind of education? Jasmine turned her head slowly, like she couldn't believe he still hadn't learned. No, Senator, she said. I believe the law belongs to everyone. But I also believe some people use their platforms to keep it out of reach for those who need it most. She tapped the binder again. There's a difference between access and ownership. You've had access all your life, connections, networks, legacy. I had to claw my way into the room. And now that I'm here, I'll be damned if I let anyone mock that path just because it didn't look like yours. Her voice grew quieter, but sharper. You talk about the law like it's static. Like it's pure. But let's be honest, the law has been used to justify segregation, to criminalize protest, to protect power before it protects people. That's not theory, Senator. That's precedent. The staffer to Kennedy's left looked down uncomfortably. Someone in the back coughed. Jasmine didn't flinch. You want to challenge me on policy? Let's debate. You want to ask why housing vouchers take 6 months to approve? Why rural courts are understaffed? Why minimum wage doesn't cover basic rent? I'll talk all day. She leaned in again. But don't come for my credentials like I wandered in off the street. I earned my place. And the fact that it unsettles you isn't my problem, it's your reflection. That line cut. Clean. Measured. Final. Even the chairman didn't interject. No one dared. Kennedy adjusted his tie again, eyes briefly scanning the ceiling as if the answer might be written up there. But the room wasn't waiting on him anymore. It was listening to her. By the time the hearing hit its third hour, the dynamic had fully shifted. Kennedy, usually the sharpest tongue in the room, had gone noticeably quiet. Not silenced by outrage or insult, but by exposure. Every time he looked Jasmine Crockett's way, he wasn't just seeing a political opponent. He was seeing someone who'd burned through the polished veneer of the chamber and forced it to look in the mirror. Crockett, meanwhile, had become the quiet center of gravity. Not because she'd shouted anyone down, but because she hadn't needed to. Her voice, calm, measured, unshaken, had made the entire room feel like it was catching up. One junior senator whispered to another, "She's not arguing, she's testifying." And that was the truth. Because when Jasmine Crockett next spoke, she didn't pivot. She dug deeper. This conversation isn't just about credentials, she said. It's about assumption. It's about what you expect someone like me to sound like, look like, act like, and what happens when I don't meet that expectation. She turned toward Kennedy again. You assumed I'd fold. You assumed my JD wasn't as valuable as yours. That it didn't come with the same rigor, the same reading, the same 3 a.m. outlines. You assumed I couldn't match you. She let it hang. But I wasn't trying to match you, Senator. I was trying to hold you accountable. A ripple moved through the room, not gasps, not whispers. Just the collective tightening of attention, the kind of stillness that only happens when everyone realizes they're witnessing something that will live beyond the moment. Crockett stood once more. I came to Congress to serve people who never get in rooms like this. Who don't get to have their voices amplified by microphones or quoted in articles. People who, when mocked or overlooked, don't get to respond. She looked around the hearing. But I do. She turned back to Kennedy. And I just did. She sat again, slow and final. Kennedy blinked once, then again. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. Because this wasn't politics as usual anymore. This was a reckoning, and it had Jasmine Crockett's name all over it. The hearing adjourned, but the moment didn't end. Not for the staffers still whispering by the elevators. Not for the interns replaying clips on their phones. Not for Senator John Kennedy, who walked out with a carefully controlled expression, but noticeably without comment. And definitely not for Representative Jasmine Crockett. By the time she returned to her office, her inbox was overflowing. The clip, less than 2 minutes of her final remarks, had already gone viral. No filters, no edits, just a fixed camera catching the stillness in her voice and the fire underneath. One headline read. Kennedy tried a jab, Crockett delivered a masterclass. Another simply. Legal lesson. National impact. But while the world was reacting, Jasmine stayed grounded. She slipped off her heels, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat beside the window. No cameras. No gavel. Just the quiet hum of a woman who had done exactly what she came to do. Her chief of staff entered. "We've got interview requests from MSNBC, CNN, even a few conservative outlets." Jasmine didn't look up. "Let's not do all of them. This wasn't about me. But people want to know what you'll say next." They already heard what mattered. That night, her team met in a small conference room with pizza boxes and yellow notepads, outlining the housing legislation she'd mentioned in the hearing, now getting sudden bipartisan attention. But the real impact showed up days later. Emails from law students. Letters from single moms. A handwritten note from a teacher in Baton Rouge that simply said, "I've never heard someone speak my life out loud like that." And one message from a Republican voter in Louisiana. "Didn't agree with everything. But I listened. And I respected it. That's more than I've felt in a long time." Jasmine Crockett didn't respond to the praise with celebration. She responded with action. Because for her, the point was never the takedown. It was the testimony. It was reclaiming the room, and making sure others like her could walk into it, stand tall, and never again be questioned for daring to belong. The hearing was over. But the message? It had just begun. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed wasn't just a political exchange, it was a shift. A reminder that knowledge doesn't bow to legacy, and truth doesn't flinch in the face of mockery. Senator Kennedy tried to question Representative Jasmine Crockett's education, her credibility, her very place in that room. But what he got in return was more than a response, it was a reckoning. Calm. Relentless. And rooted in lived experience. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because the weight of her words, and the lives behind them, spoke louder than any insult ever could. This wasn't about scoring points. This was about setting the record straight. And if you felt something stir while she spoke, if you saw your own story reflected in hers, then let this be your reminder. Credentials aren't always handed down. Sometimes, they're earned in silence, in sweat, in struggle. And when someone like Jasmine Crockett finally gets the mic, you better believe she's not just speaking for herself. She's speaking for all of us. Stay loud. Stay listening. Stay ready. Because the lesson isn't over. Not by a long shot.